My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, manga, Christmas, Stranger's franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And then randomly we give you a whole history of microscopes because realism.
Oh boy, so you guys aren't going to believe this, but I did something yesterday I swore I would never do.
Did you binge all of it?
No. I signed up for a Steam account.
Oh, that is also good news. You should join us to play Terraria later today.
I've been playing Among Us with people in the lockdown era, and there's like this new map that was released that's like the biggest Among Us map ever. But it's so big, apparently the mobile version just can't handle it, and everyone wanted to play on this new map, so they peer pressured me into signing up for Steam, and one of them gifted me the Among Us game, so I didn't have to pay for it. But I swore on principle that I would never sign up for Steam because I didn't want to. I'm afraid of being like sucked into 1,000 rabbit holes, and now I have a Steam account. So,
to be fair, you already have a Crunchyroll subscription, so the 1,000 rabbit holes was inevitable.
I mean, I've got a Funimation one, I've got a Disney Plus one, I have access to Netflix and Amazon Prime. Yeah, like I guess there's just even, and I'm on Webtoon now, so like there's just too many rabbit holes. Like,
you haven't gotten a subscription to what is it, Shonen Plus yet?
No, I have not. That'll be the next, I'm sure. But
I am actually afraid of that kind of a subscription because I definitely would lose so much time there.
Mm-hmm. Mjolnir, do you have any rabbit holes you're afraid of going down?
I joined Reddit recently, and it was a bad idea.
Yeah, that is like the ultimate actually, that'd be an interesting conversation one day. What's the worst rabbit hole on the internet?
4chan versus Reddit.
Oh, boy. We got Doomsdays again to talk about, and the list of movies that we initially discussed for the year that have not had their release dates changed is getting smaller and smaller. Most of the changes we're talking about today are the result of Paramount announcing a bunch of shifts in their release dates. So, first of all, the Snake Eyes movie is not being delayed. It's actually being advanced. It was going to be coming out in October. It's now coming out in July.
So one advancement is the advancement what's messing with the rest of them and then changing the schedule?
Well, no, I guess so. Maybe it's better to talk about it this way. Top Gun Maverick, which was supposed to come out in July, is now coming out in November, which means they now have a slot in July that's open. So they took Snake Eyes, which was coming out in October, and put it in July. And Mission Impossible 7 was supposed to come out in November. And because another Tom Cruise movie has now come out on the same day, they've moved Mission Impossible 7 to next May.
It does seem very strange that they're not, like, I understood somewhat the idea of like pushing back Top Gun to be a summer release, but now it's in November. That is like, I don't know, that was a summer flick, right? The first Top Gun was quintessentially, a summer box office hype movie, and now they're just putting it in November. That seems like just a strange decision.
I'm a huge fan of the fact that they were like, they can't handle that amount of Tom Cruise. We gotta separate them like significantly.
He's small, but he packs a big punch.
Well, yeah, they don't want to cannibalize themselves and compete against their own movies, which, I mean, we already talked about it. Like, Top Gun Maverick has already, as of the July, had a 2-year delay. So now it's going to be 2.5 years. And I really question if anyone will be interested in seeing it at this point.
Well, that movie does have an advantage over some others, that it is a very heavy nostalgia movie. So it's not necessarily relying on hype in the same way a new movie would.
It's just as topical as it was 2 years ago. Like, it was weird that they were making a sequel to Top Gun already.
Yeah, it's just it's so annoying because it's like with all these movies we're talking about, they're finished, they're just sitting on a shelf, and they're just sort of pushing them farther down the shelf.
It's really stupid, and like the movie studios are going to have to like man up and like just bite the bullet eventually, or else like their entire lineup is going to be screwed up for like years and years. Like the end also just like for most of these, it's just like the thing with Black Widow. It's like the longer you wait, the more like just bite the bullet and get it out there. The longer you wait, the more people are going to not care about it. It was already like too late to the game, and you just keep pushing it back. Like, you just gotta accept that you're going to take some losses and grab what you can.
And I think Snake Eyes is becoming the sacrificial lamb for them. They're moving that into the summer. They're like, this won't do as well. We can afford to like offer this up to the earlier release date, which, I mean, whatever. I wasn't super excited for another G.I. Joe movie anyway, but I kind of feel bad for poor Snake Eyes.
Well, he's not going to complain very loudly.
And I was probably more interested in the next Mission Impossible than I was the new Top Gun. So the fact that number 7 is delayed until next May, and they've also announced that number 8, because they are working on like multiple Mission Impossible movies, its release date is from November 2022. It's now coming out in July 2023. So by delaying the 7, it's delaying the 8th one even farther away. And this might be of interest to you, Beef Pork Ribs, but there's a Dungeons and Dragons movie that Paramount is working on that has been delayed from May 2022, which is when new Mission Impossible 7 date is coming out. That's been delayed till May 2023, so it got delayed almost an entire year.
I mean, historically, Dungeon and Dragon movies have all been
Terrible.
unilaterally, terrible. So I don't know if I'm super excited. I believe the Vox Machina animated series is still due to release this year, and that's much more exciting to me and topical to Dungeons and Dragons.
And do either of you care that the Mission Impossible movies are just kind of shifting even farther away into the future?
I mean, yes and no. I enjoy the franchise, but I was never like a big enough fan to check it out when it came out. I do enjoy it. I like that Simon Pegg is getting more and more of a role in it as he's becoming a bigger star, which is very nice, and I think does add a good element to those movies that, you know, the diminishing returns on Tom Cruise's charisma are being, you know, filled in by some other things as well.
I've only ever seen the first one, so and that was like a fun 90s romp or whatever from memory. I've only seen the first one, and I've only seen it once. So I have no strong opinions, and I could not care less whether we get the 8th movie in 2 years or 3 years or whatever.
We need to watch Ghost Protocol.
Okay. I mean, it is interesting. Like, just the entire movie industry is fascinating. Like, with how long, like, just the timeline of things, right? And how you can have stuff, like, even you see actors doing interviews 6 months before a movie comes out, and usually they're like, yeah, I did this like a year and a half ago. You know, like, that just seems like a really weird experience to me to have to, like, try to remember, like, the job you did a year and a half ago, but that's just, like, all your stuff. And now, with certain things, it's even longer waiting times in between, or, like, you know, like, with New Mutants, you know, no one getting interviewed for that could care less. They were like, I barely remember making this movie. You know, and it's just, I don't know, it's interesting like Hollywood actors are used to waiting, obviously, but this is, I feel like it's got to test his patience for sure.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even with Top Gun, like it was originally meant to come out in July 2019, which means they probably shot it in late 2018. So now, at the time of its release, it'll have been more than 3 years since they would have filmed it. So they're probably going to need someone from the production team, like giving them cue cards about their experience or something.
Send them the dailies, like 2 years late.
It is really funny having those big gaps with actors that are either on the older end of things or on the younger end of things, because you can like really tell that this was made a couple of years ago and this person has either deteriorated or like they've grown or they've hit puberty or whatever, like in between. And it's just, I don't know, it's really funny. So I think Tom Cruise is starting to hit that age where it's like, if his movies keep getting pushed back so much, like you're going to start noticing, you're going to be like, yeah, no, that was definitely Tom Cruise from 3 years ago. He doesn't look like that anymore now.
Well, you know, plastic surgery and all that. But at this point, you know, where I live, everything is shut down again. And the next movie to get a wide release is Mortal Kombat on April 23rd. So it's a few weeks from now. I won't have the option of getting to go see it in the theater, even if I wanted to. I mean, I do want to see it, so I might have to find some. Hopefully, they'll have some kind of video on demand option. And then after Mortal Kombat, the next movie is Cruella, which is like at the end of May. So we've got loads of space between movie releases, and as we've mentioned before, Cruella is going to have that combo release that Raya and the Last Dragon had, where you can get it on Disney Plus for a premium price, or you can go see it in a theater where theaters are open. So.
Yeah, lovely. When is Black Widow supposed to come out? Because May is usually, like, May is normally Marvel month. Like, the last couple of years, it's been pretty consistently, like, Marvel releases a movie in May.
Yeah, that's been delayed to July 8th. So, and it's announced it's also getting the premium access theater joint release. So that
the fact that they were like, yeah, we'll put out Cruella before Black Widow. Like, May is the perfect time to put out Black Widow. Like, I mean, not the perfect time to put out Black Widow was many years ago, but they should have made it many years ago. But anyway, like people are primed for Marvel movies in May, and they were like, no, 101 Dalmatians prequel? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Well, I mean, people are getting all kinds of Marvel content because of the Disney Plus shows, so I'm sure that's part of the case to be made, because Falcon Winter Soldier has 2 episodes left, and then there's a bit of a break before Loki starts in June, and I think that'll be wrapping up by the time Black Widow comes out. So lots of ways to get Marvel content, but that's not where we're here today. I'm sure I'd rather talk about that than this, but we are here today to talk about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
The powerful stand user has arrived in Naples. His father and I go way back. His name was Dio Brando. I had to know whether Giorno Giovanna was Dio's son.
Hand over your wallet.
And if he was,
don't say I didn't try to warn you.
how much he took after his father.
Despite his calm demeanor,
Take him down before he gets away!
he has a savage side, which makes him dangerous.
I strongly suggest you abandon following me.
Salvation awaits. Prepare, as before you lie 2 paths.
Do you think he's a true enemy? Intercept him, Golden Wind! Could he be an ally?
I still don't know why I'm born into these powers. But I think it would be a waste not to use them.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind.
A very different extended universe of interlocking characters.
Yes, I'm just imagining MCU-style movies with these characters would be very interesting.
Beautiful.
So, as always, when we're talking about a topic for the first time, we need to do our secret origin segment. So, Beef Pork Ribs, we'll start with you, since I think you have the most history with this franchise.
There is a wonderful YouTuber called Super Eye Patch Wolf that I discovered because of his like hour and 40-minute video on why you should watch Hunter x Hunter. And I was obviously aware of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's existence, but I hadn't really watched it. And then he made a video that was about an hour about why you should watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I thought he made some compelling arguments. So I watched it, and I watched the first part, and then I read up to part 5, and then I watched part 2, 3, and 4, and then I read part 6. So I still haven't read part 7 or 8, so Steel Ball Run or JoJolion, and I have yet to watch Venteorio part 5 because I did convince Mjolnir to start watching it recently. I guess that'll cut into yours a little bit, and we're still on part 4.
So I married this total nerd who's obsessed with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And so I got exposed to it, and it was one of the things on his list that I, absolutely had to see. So we've been slowly working our ways through it, and it's been pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of the punchy fighty animes, but it's got a lot of style and flair in between the punchy fighty stuff, and depending on the parts, there's different levels of good characterization and stuff. So it's been pretty enjoyable. I need a break from it sometimes, but we're currently in part 4 of the anime. I don't read manga. I can't read backwards. It's confusing. But we've been watching the anime. It's been pretty good.
Great. So I am the noob here because I did not watch a lot of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure before this week. I think if I'm going back, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It came on Netflix. And prior to that, I had heard of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure because, I would say it was around 2012, 2013. I was starting to really become more of an anime fan beyond just stuff I grew up with as a kid. And, you go to anime news websites, or you go to the website My Anime List where they rank anime shows, or you watch YouTube videos like best this anime, best that anime. You look at anime memes. You do not have to look very hard or very long to find something referencing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And in part, that's because this series has a very, most anime and manga have a unique art style. If you have an eye for visual art, you can tell what series a piece of art or a cell of animation is from, because each different artist has a very unique character design system. And JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has a very distinct style. A lot of the characters have really long faces and very angular features, and their eyes are drawn a certain way. So I would see images and GIFs out of context and I'd be like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. This man is doing something with a cherry in his tongue. But I just know from the way his face is drawn that he's a JoJo Bizarre Adventure character. And every time I'd seen a clip or someone tried to describe it, it did sound as bizarre as the name suggests. So when it did pop up on Netflix, I was curious, and I watched, I think, the first 2 or 3 episodes, and I could see, oh yeah, I see where some of these references come from. I see where some of the appeal comes from, but it just didn't kind of capture my heart or attention enough to keep watching.
Which, to be fair, it's a 2012 adaptation of an artist's first manga in the 80s.
Yeah, and that's a good way to transition into the secret origin for the franchise. As you just mentioned, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a manga series that was adapted into an anime once in the 1990s and once in the early 2010s. Now, this is interesting to talk about because for people who don't know, generally, anime is made out of a manga series as a way to sell the manga, as a way to get publicity out for the manga. So generally, anime adaptations happen while the manga is running and while it's popular. And an anime will only get additional seasons if it's boosting sales of the manga. So it's very rare to see anime studios choose to adapt an older series.
Which, to be fair, also, the first adaptation in the 90s was, and I guess we might talk about this adaptation a little bit because it was very strange, but it was because the manga was popular. But that anime was pretty awful and had one of the strangest production ever, so it didn't really help. But then I think it was just this big consciousness, which I think the memes do have a lot to do with that just suddenly people realized what the influence of JoJo's as a series was, and I think, somebody is like, wait, the series has been running since the late 80s, and people are still reading it in Japan, and it's still fairly popular. Maybe we should cash in on that.
And there are some manga series that have run for many, many, many years, but it's very rare that popular manga series will continue on for more than 10 years. There are exceptions to the rule, but generally it seems like if a manga goes longer than 10 years, it's like one of the kind of gold standards that won't go away. So with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, this is the brainchild of writer and artist Hirohiko Araki, who had done some work before this, but this is really his, like, I guess you would call it his magnum opus, his main work he's known for. He started drawing and writing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for Shonen Jump, which is like one of the big manga publishers, in January 1987. And he has continued writing that manga to this very day. I don't even know, that's like what, 34 years later?
Yeah. Without aging a day, no less. A pretty impressive feat.
He is 60 years old as of the time of this recording. So I think he's probably one of the older mangakas, which is like the Japanese word for a manga creator. I think he's one of the older mangakas working today. But it is sort of astounding that the series has continued on in manga for this long, and that the same guy is still writing it.
Have you seen pictures of him though, Average Joe? You should look him up. It's really funny. He does not look his age. He looks like he's maybe late 20s. It's amazing.
I have seen like one picture of him, and I would agree with that sentiment. I assumed it was an old photo, but maybe I was wrong.
He actually started modeling in his 50s, interestingly enough. See, I know more deep cut things, but there is actually a general theory in the fandom, not a real one, but people mockingly say that the reason the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure featured vampires is because Araki himself is a vampire and doesn't seem to have aged since, he turned 20. Some pushing it so far as to saying he was the model of the Mona Lisa, but that's going a little bit into weird thing territory.
So in the last 34 years, there have been 129 volumes of the manga written and drawn, which means that's like hundreds, thousands of chapters. And this guy has just been continuing on like a champ. I understand from hearing people talk about it that being a writer, an artist in the manga industry is very hard, and it's very stressful work because you're just constantly working, publishing like the next chapter. So, and hearing that he looks so young is, I guess, affirming, but I'm like, whatever he does to like make himself stay sane, like, good on him.
Yeah, no, especially because they don't delegate the way they do in Western comics. Like, everything, it's all on like one person pretty much to do the writing and the drawing and like everything. Whereas in Western comics, like, even the person who like does the inking and the coloring is different. Like, there's like at least 5 or 6 people working on different aspects of a comic at all times. And for manga, it's like all on one person. And then if you make it big enough, you get assistants to help a little bit.
Which I'm sure at this point he probably does, hopefully.
It's very impressive.
He does, but he also does still publicly release new artwork and pieces, so it's not like he hasn't lost his touch as an artist either, which is pretty impressive.
And Araki, as a creator, he's been very open with his influences, and when you watch or read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's very clear. He loves Western rock and roll music. He loves fashion. He loves Italy. He loves American cinema and American literature. And there are many, many ways in which characters or settings in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure kind of evoke this sort of influence. So if you're if you're living in North America or in Europe and you're discovering this anime series, it is sort of interesting to see how like our culture has influenced somebody from Japan.
He's also very fond of that one trip he took when he was younger throughout Asia onwards to Africa, to the point where one of the parts literally follows the same itinerary he did on that trip.
Well, you know what they say, life imitates art? No, this is the opposite. Life informed the art.
Yes, and it is something that he very strongly believes in. I've seen a video of him drawing some characters, and he literally has on his desk like open books of Renaissance Italian artists to like look at, you know, body symmetry and how to draw it, and like it is quite like, probably this was a recorded video that he published, so it might have pushed it a little bit, but there were like, you know, classic Renaissance art books, architecture book, and fashion magazines all kind of on his desk while he was drawing, and he was like flipping through them for references as well. So, and as you said, he's not subtle about his influences, particularly the rock and roll music.
He's such a little nerd. It's so cute.
And I learned yesterday he's the first mangaka to have his art on display in the Louvre.
Really? That's great.
Not surprised on the whole, both because he would be much more excited. I feel like he would be much more excited than any other mangaka in Japan about that perspective. But also, he's a very talented artist.
I have a love-hate relationship with his art style because I don't like the way his people look. Their designs are too busy. There's too much going on. I get it, like the way he draws like his big muscly men, like it's meant to be like an exaggerated play on like American movies from the 80s, but they're just, and he's drawn so many different characters that I find like when I look at him, like I don't even know where I'm supposed to look because there's just so much going on visually. And I find, yeah, even just the way he draws like people's faces, it's like they're hard to look at.
Yes, but also it is a lot of strong intentional character design. If you ever have time, there's been several videos just analyzing the character design of the JoJo's protagonist and how basically everything has a purpose in the way that it is taken. And it is very busy, but it also makes sense when you dig into it. And it's a level of detail that I appreciate, though I do understand that visually as you're just looking at it, yeah, you don't get more out of it.
It's also interesting because his art style has evolved quite a bit. Because the people, like, after part 3, people are not just after part 3, the inherent like men weren't inherently ginormous beefcakes anymore. Like that wasn't like the standard that everyone was humongous after part 3. Which is especially because we just recently started watching part 4, and the character Jotaro is in part 3 and part 4, and it really makes you realize how much he, I don't know, decided to
tone down the muscles,
to change things and change his approach a little bit. When you're like, this is the same character. In part 3, he was a 17-year-old boy who looked like a 30-year-old man with ginormous muscles and like super sharp cheekbones that were like just lines and all that good stuff. And in part 4, it's like 10 years later, and he looks younger and he's smaller and it is the same character, and there's like enough there you can see it, but also he kind of looks like a different person, and it's kind of crazy because he still has a very exaggerated style, but he like decided to exaggerate other things, I guess, besides muscles.
Yeah, which also he's following trends in like manga and comics as well, where the muscle men are no longer what is popular, but whereas in the 80s and 90s, that like especially when he started, one of the big series out in Japan was Fist of the North Star, which is just all the manliest strong men punching each other while shouting it in very high-pitched voice.
Yeah, so you guys might be listening to this not knowing anything about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. it's kind of hard to provide like a summary of the plot because as you've already heard us reference the different parts. And that's because quite literally there are, at this point, I think there's 8 or 9 parts to the manga series, and each part follows a different set of characters. And it changes location, it changes time period. So I would almost go as far to say it's kind of like that TV show True Detective, where it like the concept is generally the same, but every season focuses on different characters in a different setting. Or maybe you guys can comment on this. Is it kind of like the anime version of Doctor Who?
The thing is, I think it'd be closer to Doctor Who, but with the important difference that the main characters are different people and are related, and it gets strange, but at least for the first 3 parts, it was just generational gaps, which makes it more like War and Peace, I believe. Yeah, but it's more generational and following what's happening, but then after that, it starts getting a little weird, and it's just in a shared universe until it becomes a multiverse in part 7. And then it gets very complicated. But I think the problem is if you say that, you need to stipulate that it is only like that in the sense that the main characters change, but that the universe stays similar. But I would also add the thing that that's really from part 3 onwards, because part 1, 2, and 3 are all very different. And then it kind of stabilizes in a certain style and certain universe rules that vary much less after part 3.
He was clearly trying things out and figuring out what worked, and dropped a lot of, just kind of forgot about a lot of things in the first couple parts, and just straight up the power system changes completely in the second part.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that it's sort of one of the benefits of this series as a whole is that each part can be almost like different genres. Like you mentioned, there's vampires in the first part, and then it's kind of like just people who are really strong fighting each other, and then it gets to a point where there's like psychic powers introduced later on, and that's sort of the main way people are fighting each other. But there's like some parts that are like a mystery, some are like, I understand there's one arc that's like a prison break kind of take on the story. There's one that is more like a globetrotting adventure, probably referencing the trip that
would it be
Araki
worth
went
going
on.
through the parts like quickly to give people an idea?
I think it might just be too confusing to try and explain, just to explain the plots of all the different parts. But I've heard people say that is why JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has been able to continue so long as a manga series, because it can constantly reinvent itself and do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is somewhat typical of most long-running animes or mangas, is that at some point they evolve and change. Like if you look at Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, it went from being a very fantasy slice of, like a fantasy almost gag manga, to a martial art fantasy, to a space martial arts, to a just superpowered beings. And though the differences are not huge necessarily in that one, there is an evolution of style. And same thing with something like One Piece, where the author just set it up so that he could make it almost a different universe every island they go. And, you know, the solution Araki found to not being stale is to, just change the main protagonist, change where in the world it's happening, and just have some small through lines, enough that it's in the same universe, and there are certain things that are still recognizable, but it is completely different.
Yeah, because it is kind of hard to write the same characters for a long time. Like Dragon Ball is a perfect example. By the time that they're in the Dragon Ball Super era, there's some characters who have like been around since Dragon Ball who really have no purpose, and they try to find ways to shoehorn them into the story while also continually introducing new characters, and the whole thing just gets so incredibly crowded that it's just almost unwatchable.
And I think there is this kind of strange thing, which I think is almost to Araki's benefit, that JoJo's did not hit the full stride of its popularity until part 3. Because by that time he'd already set a precedent to change the main character because, and I know this is maybe a little technical for us to go into, like, our anime geekiness, but, like, you know, I'm sure you know this, Akira Toriyama, the author of Dragon Ball Z, was trying to make Goku's son, Gohan, the main character. But the editors and the fans wouldn't let him do that, and it had to still be Goku, because at the end of the Cell Saga, Gohan was supposed to take over as main character, and Goku was supposed to just be dead and in the afterlife training forever. Whereas Araki was able to make that change, and I think that it is indeed one of the things that gave JoJo's the staying power it has, is that, well, if you don't like it that much anymore, you can just wait a few years and then there'll be a new part, and maybe you'll like that setting better.
But it almost makes you wonder, like, why bother calling it the same thing if it's constantly kind of doing something different?
Because, well, I mean, at the beginning it's because there were literally family link between the characters, but I think at this point it's just a gimmick, and I don't know, how many people can have the nickname JoJo without it becoming...
Stupid.
Completely stupid. It's stupid, it's just not completely stupid yet. But also I think... and this again might be a little more technical, but like part of it also is that the power system, which is established in part 3, is one of the things that in the anime community, JoJo's is best known for, is the stand fighting system, which is one of the systems that avoid the power creep problem. And I don't want to get too much into it, but power creep is basically means that if you have characters that keep on getting stronger and stronger, the stakes start getting weirder, and you just need to have, like, by the time you get to one person can destroy a planet with his finger at the beginning of the anime, how do you make it, you know, more dramatic later on? And by having a change of setting but keeping that one battle system together, you don't have to reintroduce people to what's happening when these fights are going on, but you can still change what the outcome of the fights and what the stakes are, because you're not just constantly having world-ending threats.
Yeah, and maybe that's, you're right, it is kind of a gimmick that the show kind of maintains the same title going through these different settings and genres and time periods. But it's like, if there's one part you don't like you say, there might be another part you do like. You know, to prepare myself for this episode, I took your advice and watched like the first parts of every different part that has been animated, and then I watched some of the last episodes as well to kind of see like what the journey was, and it was kind of cool. Like, I watched the end of part 2, and then I watched the start of part 3, and I was like, oh, like, okay, there's that character that I saw, and then now here's them older, introducing a new character. And then I watched the start of part 4, and yeah, Jotaro, who's the lead character in part 3, shows up as kind of like a side character in part 4. And then a side character from part 4 shows up in part 5, like in the first episode, to kind of, again, continue that continuity. And as like a comic book geek, I do like that kind of idea of trying to maintain a shared universe, as opposed to, I guess, it at some point it does kind of just feel like a bunch of spin-offs of kind of like the same original concept.
Which is odd, because Netflix recently released a spin-off anime of JoJo's Part 4, the World According to Rohan or something like that.
So it is capable of having spin-offs. It's just like some of them, it's like, no, this is just the main story now. That's all. It is really interesting. I think part of it too is like a lot of it's because of the way fans are too, right? That this has worked, and since it's working, why wouldn't he keep doing it? Because fans do tend to be generally, until you get to a certain level of fan, a fan will be more loyal to a property than to an author. So and also, as we kind of briefly discussed, like, the manga industry is like super cutthroat and like super hard, right? So if you have a popular manga and you want to do well, and you know people like this manga, why would you end the popular manga and try to start a whole new manga and like kind of start over from scratch with maybe some really loyal fans following you because they liked your work, but you're going to lose a lot of people just because you're starting a new property? Why would you do that when you've cleverly, I mean, started out pretty cleverly written in a way and a reason to just change things up without technically changing the manga. And then, like we said, he's had to get more creative more recently, but like it makes sense. And like you said, the thing, fans, they're loyal to properties and characters, and they love a little Easter egg. They love oh, look, it's that person who showed up in episode 3 of part 1, and now they're back 4 parts later. Oh my gosh. I'm so proud that I noticed that. You can, and obviously that's if you're if you're keeping it in the same manga, that's a lot easier to do, and the fans will be much happier with that little like rush of adrenaline that they noticed a random character, than if you started over completely.
And I think, you were talking about comparing with the MCU. People were super excited to have like random mentions of character even before they started making a shared cinematic universe. So I think it does show that this can work really well. And I just wanted to quickly, just because I'm a geek and I like showing off, touch on also the idea of like the cutthroat manga industry. Both T. Kubo and Masashi Kishimoto, the authors of Naruto and Bleach, which were really huge mangas, have recently started new series that are doing really poorly, which proves that, people are, whereas the spin-off of Naruto is doing very, very well, even though it's, mostly fan pandering. And so it is probable that at some point Araki made the decision, I'm going to keep doing JoJo's because that's what people want and that's what people are going to keep enjoying.
But he found a way to make it fresh for himself instead of devolving completely into fan service and, oh look, the character everyone loves, he won with one punch again or whatever. Like,
yeah, and I'm pretty sure I actually heard that Kishimoto is now involved with the manga of Boruto, the Naruto spinoff, because they asked for his help or something. But I see the need to like be fresh, because like right now I'm watching the Inuyasha sequel series called Yashahime, and it's like about the children of the main characters in the first series. It's too close, I guess. Like all those characters from the first series are still alive. So the threats that the new characters are facing, it's like, well, what's the big deal? Why can't like the parents could just come in and solve their problems? So it's not there needs to be more. I think there should have done like, a bigger jump in time or something and that's clearly like what JoJo's does very well, is it like jumps farther ahead so that the heroes who saved the day last time can't just come in and like
or change what the stakes are so that the heroes who fought last time are no longer relevant, or just aren't on the same power level, because that's what happened in part 2, part 3. The main character of part 2 is still there, but now the power he had that made him really good is no longer relevant to the way fighting happens in this universe.
And that's and with what makes the anime version of JoJo that we have now so interesting is, again, going back to what we said earlier, generally anime is made out of manga that is kind of freshly published in the last couple of years. But when they started doing the anime in 2012, they were adapting manga that had been drawn in the 1990s. So they were like adapting decades old manga, and that's still kind of the case. Like just this week, it's kind of funny that this happened when we were talking about it, but just this week they finally announced the anime version of part 6 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And that manga section was written in the early 2000s. So they're still kind of at this pace of adapting material that was written like 20 years ago. But what makes JoJo's Bizarre Adventure interesting is that even though the anime is adapting decades old material, is that somehow, and I guess it must be the result of its like quirkiness or whatever, it doesn't feel like they're adapting decades old material. Like it doesn't feel dated.
I mean, it also, a lot of credit has to be given to the animation studio for taking choosing a pretty strong style, both of like colors and visuals, and kind of sticking to it to be like, this is what the feel of JoJo's is for the anime. Because it's not, because if you do look, panel to screen, parts 1 and 2 especially, it's not quite the same level of similarity as the other adaptations have been since, but they're all similar enough to each other that it works. You know what I mean? Like if you went directly from the first episode of part 1 to the last episode of part 5, you'd definitely see the change, but you'd also still see enough resemblance to say, oh yeah, that I could see how that's the same show.
Yeah, and Mjolnir, you mentioned the fan base. I've heard people call the JoJo fans like the locusts of the anime community, and I think what they were trying to say, to not be like completely mean to them, but to say that JoJo fans are so passionate about it that they just want everyone to. They are very much geeks. They're evangelistic in their love of the series, and they want everyone else to enjoy it, and that's why they invest so much time in like creating memes and talking about it. And I understand like there's so many characters that are named after the rock bands from, and so like they'll go on actual music videos for like REO Speedwagon and make JoJo references there.
Which is kind of one of the strange things about the anime. If you do watch it, some of the subs that exist haven't done this, but mostly if you're watching the dub, a lot of characters will have names that sound very strange, but it's because there were copyright issues. For example, there's a character called Vanilla Ice in the manga, and his ability is called Cream, so it's Vanilla Ice and Cream. But in the anime, the American dubs, and actually in the American release of the manga, he had to be called Cool Ice because they couldn't get the rights to the name Vanilla Ice. There's a whole lot of them. That it's one of the most entertaining things is to like one character, his power is called Killer Queen in the original, and it was changed to Deadly Queen because they didn't want to. But oddly enough, its secondary power is still called Another One Bites the Dust, which makes the Queen song reference really obvious. But they still, one of them apparently was more copyrightable than the other.
The phrase "is that a JoJo reference" has been kind of like etched into my brain because, again, trying to learn more about the anime community and learning more about anime, and you just watch, there are a lot of anime that reference JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in some way, and so like the idea of, is that a JoJo reference? Like I can't think of another anime that has that kind of like quotability or memeability.
I mean, the only anime I think that's on par with it for quotability and out of context memeability would be Gintama, but Gintama is also specifically structured to do that. But the thing about the "is that a JoJo's reference" is, I mean, I think that sentence, and like you were talking about the JoJo's fans being a little bit locusty and being everywhere, is probably why the anime got made and why it became so popular. Because I do remember when the anime started, like in 2012, I didn't watch it, but all those "to be continues" memes with the song. Yeah.
I knew that meme like for years. I had no idea it was anything to do with anime at all. Actually.
Yeah, there are some JoJo's reference that a lot of people who don't even know anime, or at least who don't know JoJo's, do actually know. Like the one that's most obvious to me, I think, was for years I didn't understand why in Dragon Ball Z Abridged, Gildo, when he stopped time, would drop a steamroller on Krillin. But that's a JoJo's reference, and it's just things that
It was me, Dio.
Yeah, it was I, Dio, or just, and I think, which does play into the strengths of Araki, and again, as an artist, love him or hate him, posing in anime. So many frames of anime or of mangas are recreation of poses or famous pages of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And that's probably one of the biggest reference to JoJo's is people or characters just striking the poses that Araki has kind of become famous for inventing, just these weird ways of standing or like pointing or just be existing that have kind of permeated anime.
A very aggressive word art, like graphics kind of like flying at the screen, like shaking. Like, it's a JoJo's reference when they're doing that.
Or when just the idea of stands as a power, having this weird spirit creature glowing behind your back that only you and other people can see attacking, like the entire what was it, Blue Dragon, it was a cartoon series. That's exactly what it is. Everybody has this creature that comes out of their shadow behind them. It's a stand. It's and whether it was direct reference to JoJo's or to that idea that exists in anime because of JoJo's, it's, you know, it's still, its influence is everywhere.
Now, Mjolnir, who's somebody who's like part of the cosplay community, when you look at like the design work of these JoJo's characters, like, do you agree with my kind of complaint that there's too much going on, or do you think it's like it's good that they're so complex?
You know, someone is a hardcore cosplayer when they cosplay a JoJo's character. It is. I mean, anime in general is just, it's very impressive for most animes to be able to recreate that very stylized look. But JoJo's is definitely one of the most out there ones. Some characters are easier than others. I'm personally, one of my like dream cosplays on my list now is young Joseph Joestar from Part 2. I love him and his cute little skinny jeans and tank top look in the 30s. So good. And that is one of the easier ones for sure. But even that, his hair is so ridiculous. Like, I'm gonna have to get a really good quality wig and a lot of hairspray and hairstyle. Like, it will take a lot of work to even attempt to bring that hair to life.
All right, let's just play a game right now. All right, everyone look up a random JoJo character, and we will attempt to describe what they look like, and this will give everyone an idea at home how wild these designs are.
Should we each pick a different part?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with Jotaro.
That's a good.
Jotaro Kujo is the main character from Part 3.
No, I was doing that for you. All right, go with Jotaro first.
All right, so we got this guy who Mjolnir mentioned earlier is 17 years old, except he's like 6'9", and he's just all muscles. You swear he's wearing shoulder pads underneath, but he's wearing what looks like a blue school uniform, like the Navy thing, but it's somehow like a trench coat instead of just a jacket. And it's got a big collar, and he's got like this gold chain thing kind of hanging off the left side that's like going down like halfway down his shirt, and it's not messing up his collar at all somehow. He's got 2 different belts that are going diagonally, and they got like these zigzag patterns on them. He's wearing what looks like a purple undershirt with what I think is like a buckle from his jacket kind of going across his chest, a little yellow golden nub on there. And then he's wearing a hat that it looks like a train conductor's hat, but it's got some gold stuff on it. And I know the way it's drawn in the show, it often blends into his hair, and often you're given the impression that his hair is his hat, but I haven't seen him take it off, so it's not meant to be his hat.
It's so funny though, because in Part 4 they changed his color scheme to be all white, but they still draw the hair like that. So it's really off. Like, you do just see his hair straight up like fade into his hat, just like black hair, and suddenly it's a white hat. It's ridiculous. His hair makes no sense.
All right, going back to Part 2, Mjolnir is going to describe Caesar Zappelli.
Aw, my beautiful boy. Okay, this child has a cute little, skinny for JoJo's Part 2. Like, he's like the closest thing to a twink they got in that part. You know, he's not quite as beefcake as everyone else, still pretty beef though. And he's got just this wild blonde hair with, actually, if one was looking at a photo of Jotaro to like follow along, one will recognize the headband around Caesar's head, because it is in fact that's why Jotaro's belt looks like that. It's Caesar's headband, which is cool. And he's got a little feather he's got little feathers. Is it on either side or just one?
Both sides.
It's both sides. So he's got like a little Hermes helmet type of thing, like feathers sticking out at either side of the headband, and like a little, tattoo or like makeup, like little
little pink splotches underneath his eyes, which are very cute, and then a fabulous flowing pink scarf, and like a cut-off jacket, like a belly shirt but a jacket that's blue, and then a chest plate underneath the jacket, and then a t-shirt or a tank top underneath the chest plate, and just some really flouncy, beautiful pants. Oh, and gloves. He's got like fingerless gloves that are great too. Oh, he's so beautiful. What's yours before Grips?
I was considering describing Funny Valentine, but since there isn't an anime version of that character yet, so I'm going to describe Giorno Giovanna, the main character of Part 5. So he's got blonde hair that has a ponytail, and also 3 holes in the front of it. There's no other way to describe it. His hair goes into like mini hollow pompadours at the front, but the rest of his hair flows like a regular anime character.
I have seen people make wigs for that. It is very impressive. Like, how?
He's wearing a similar or reminiscent of the Japanese school uniform kind of aesthetic purple jacket, but with a cut open heart outline on the chest.
It's like Power Girl's boob window.
Yeah, it's very tight with golden edges around the heart and some gold bracelets, as well as decorations on the collar. He has a giant belt buckle and very tight pants. Also purple.
So if that showed you guys listening anything, Araki is very creative with how he designs characters. Impractical, probably, but it certainly helps them stand out, and it certainly contributes to the overall bizarreness of the series. I would almost like, so my brief exposure to this show, I watched the first, I saw the first part years ago, and it makes sense. People say that it's hard to get into as a show because the first part is kind of like, among the worst parts, so it's like hard to get into. So I enjoyed the end of part 2, even though I had no idea what was going on. I enjoyed the first part of part 3. It seemed like it was setting up something interesting. I really enjoyed the start of part 4. That was setting up like a mystery and like a kind of like a small town, and it seemed like something I'd be really interested in. If I do go back, I'd probably go back and watch part 4. And part 5
does tend to be a fan favorite.
Yeah, part 5 did not really do anything for me. And based on what I've seen of the plot of part 6, it sounds like I would enjoy that one. So I'm definitely interested enough to like check out the different parts of the show that I think I would enjoy. But Before Gribbs is the bigger fan here. Like, sell the people on why they should check out JoJo's.
I'm first going to just quickly point out that context doesn't help for the last episode of part 2. I mean, it helps a little bit, but not much. I will admit, part 1 is a little hard to get through.
You gotta power through it, yeah.
Well, mostly because it has very much that the hero wins because he's bigger and buffer than other people, which was a common trope in the 80s, and it also has a lot of flaws that get fixed. But it's a good introduction to the world, to the characters, and honestly, I think that the first episode of part 1 does some of the best job of any anime episode of establishing well and quickly the villain and protagonist and their exact characters. And I do think that the rivalry between Dio and Jonathan does carry that part. Part 2 is entirely bombastic, and if you're not into it by the second or third episode of part 2, then maybe this isn't for you. But even if that's the case, I would still recommend watching part 4. Like you said, it is generally recognized as being one of the stronger, and it is one of the fan favorites because it does dial back from the crazy fighting, and it is very much a small town mystery, much more intimate, much more character driven, a lot less fighting. And it doesn't have like the one, all the other parts have a specific villain to defeat. And the defeat will be by beating him up and by beating up his minions before getting to him. part 1, 2, and 3 all have that kind of idea, whereas part 4, there is a main villain to defeat, but you don't even know who he is until halfway through the series. Like, he literally does not appear on camera until halfway through the series, except for little teasers, and then even after he appears, the main characters don't know it's him until the last third. And it's a lot more about them discovering their town. Part 5, if you like mobster movies and you like being completely fabulous, you will love it. It is one of the parts that focuses the most on relationships, character relationships particularly, and so that's what makes it great. Part 6, which is now going to be an anime, it's a prison break. It's a bit more of a detective story. If you enjoyed The Promised Neverland, but then thought that more things should have happened on screen, you will enjoy Stone Ocean, because things do happen on screen, and it is about trying.
Please do not mention Promised Neverland. I have watched the second season with my brother, and we are.
I have not seen the second season, but I have heard all the terrible things.
I'm not happy.
But the idea is that, you see everything happening, and it is a lot more clever. And if you don't like the fighting and punching, then part 4, definitely your thing. If you enjoy the fighting and you like a good old power fantasy shonen manga, like fight anime, watch part 3. It is the pinnacle of that. It is amazing. It has great, very stupid characters that are very strong and very lovable, and it is the most memeable part.
I had a really hard time getting through part 3. It is a lot. So if you like the more character based stuff, but here's the thing, because part 2 has the fighty stuff too, but it just has such character that it worked. Like, I really, really enjoyed part 2. And part 3 had good things, and I agree, it has good characters, but it gets a little too caught up on the fights that take like 3 episodes each to finish and stuff, instead of focusing on the characters more. So if you're not into that stuff, like, fair warning, part 3 is a lot to handle.
Yeah, I almost want to consider JoJo's Bizarre Adventure the Anchorman of anime, because I think of Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, as the most quotable movie ever, and you can just say the quotes out of context and it still sounds funny. And I feel like a lot of the things that are super quotable in JoJo's kind of fit into the same box.
Yes, I am. It definitely, and again, part 3, super memeable, very quotable. Not exclusively, but it's very well thought out fights, though, even though it's fighting, and you see the return of one of the best antagonists in anime.
And you know what? This is a selfish reason to like this series, but you don't really see main characters in anime named Joseph. So it is kind of cool to see characters. Well, first of all, it's hilarious to hear Japanese actors try and say Joseph, but then it's just cool to Joseph. Anyway, it's just fun to have characters in anime use my name, or to variations of my name.
I mean, and Joseph is arguably one of the. I mean, there's a lot of arguments for who the best protagonist is. I still think it's Jotaro, personally, but Joseph is a strong candidate.
Joseph is my favorite JoJo. When we have a son, he will be named Joseph.
I gotta say though, I'm gonna have to ask you off air, because there's a claim in the first episode of part 4 that really kind of tarnishes Joseph's character, and I want to ask you if that's true or not, because I'll be very disappointed if it ends up being true.
All right, we'll get to that.
So, having said all of this, if you have listened to this conversation and you're still not convinced that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is not worth your time, that's okay. But if anything we've said has gotten you interested in this series, it is available for streaming on Crunchyroll, and I don't know if it is on Netflix still. So
the first 2 seasons, I believe, are still on Netflix.
So there you go, guys. Lots of opportunities to check this series out. And like I said, there is another part of the anime coming out, I guess, in the next year or so. I don't think they announced an actual release date
They
for it.
didn't announce a release date, but if it follows the same kind of scheduling after the announcement that Part 5 did, which seems very likely, it should be out sometimes towards the end of this year.
And the manga is still ongoing, and I think they're in part 8 now, you said, in the manga?
Shoujo, yeah.
So you'll never get... I mean, I would be impressed if you caught up with the manga if you started reading it now, because that would be a lot of reading. We don't usually do this when we're just talking about a show in general, but let's give it a back cookie based on our own experience. And Mjolnir, since you are the person who gets to give out less back cookies, let's hear from you first.
But I have to rate it on a whole. That's so hard. I struggled with like half of it. But okay, it's out of 4, right? Overall a 3. Like its strengths I think are really strong, and I will always admire and reward just very bold passion and creativity that is unapologetic.
I will give JoJo's Bizarre Adventure a 4 out of 4 bat cookies.
What?
Because I don't think that being objective about this series is what this series is about. If I was being objective, though, I would probably give it a overall. I'd say overall, I would give it a 3.6. But I do think that if you take out part 1, it easily becomes like a 3.7, 3.8.
Yeah, I think objectively it is hard to... I find this show very interesting. This series very interesting because it does a lot of things that other shows don't. It is in a very unique place in the anime world. So, but for my own enjoyment, like I think I'd enjoy certain parts of it more than others. So holistically, I think I'll agree with Mjolnir. I'll give it just a solid 3 out of 4 bat cookies.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the Bat Jar now. Find out our topic for next time. This is honestly what I miss being with you guys the most, because I hate being the person actually pulling things out of here. And there's less accountability. Like, I'm worried that people might think I'm just choosing things I want.
Average Joe, nobody who's heard you talk would believe that you would have willingly pulled out JoJo's Bizarre Adventure on purpose.
Oh, this is interesting, based on what we've spoken about today. Decades later, sequels or spin-offs?
Ah, yeah.
Oh, you can talk about Dumb and Dumber 2.
Well, we can talk about so many things.
Yeah, so I don't know where this will go, but I think this was put in the jar because we were talking about so many movies like Blade Runner 2049 that were examples of a sequel to a movie coming out decades later. So what do you think?
I think also, like, a lot of sequels to 80s movies are coming out recently, so...
Yeah. Should we put a timestamp on it, say it has to be at least 20 years after the original?
Let's say we're gonna go with that. Like, we might mention other things as well, but it has to be at least 10 years, but probably 20 is better. Because what I think it defines this kind of genre is that the main character, or the main actors, are recognizably older.
I cannot wait to hear you guys talk about the Lady Ghostbusters fiasco. Have fun.
Okay. Well, come back to the Bachelor Podcast next week when we talk about sequels that were made at least 20 years after the original. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
I'm Mjolnir.
Catch you on the flip side.
Hail to